Under the vast breath of the early world, before time learned the weight of memory, there was only light and rhythm. A soft golden hum that wove heaven and earth into a single living fabric. The air itself shimmered, thick with warmth and promise, carrying the scent of honey and flame. It was a world where gods walked close enough from mortals to feel their footsteps, and the sky, vast and patient, leaned low enough to taste the prayers that rose from the soil. In this beginning, Nyame reigned above, the god of the boundless sky, keeper of stars, master of every secret carried by the wind. His presence was not one of thunder or flame, but of steady brilliance, like the calm pulse of the sun at its highest hour. His eyes were said to hold the shimmer of eternity, and his voice, when it moved, rippled through creation in songs that made rivers tremble and trees remember their roots. The heavens were his garment, and the stars were but the ornaments of his vast and unknowable heart. Beneath him stretched the world of mortals, restless and tender, filled with stories waiting to be told. Among them moved Anansi, the spider, the trickster, the weaver of tales. Neither god nor man, he belonged to both and to neither, living between boundaries that most feared to cross. His body was small, yet his spirit was vast, spun from threads of curiosity and mischief. He saw what others did not, the spaces between truths, the whispers between words, the hunger behind the stillness of the divine. In those early days, the world was still new enough to blush at its own reflection. The days burned bright and golden, the nights cool and drenched with silver. Rivers murmured in secret tongues, and the wind played with the scent of blooming palm and soft earth. There was no true separation between the sacred and the flesh. To breathe was already to pray, and to desire was to create. Yet even in this harmony, a longing pulsed quietly beneath all things, a yearning for more, for closeness, for understanding. The gods, though mighty, longed to be remembered. The mortals, though fleeting, longed to be eternal. Between them danced the delicate balance of want and restraint, the kind that hums beneath every heartbeat. And in that space, Anansi found his purpose.
He had watched the gods from afar, their grandeur, their pride, their distance, but none fascinated him as Nyame did. The sky god was unlike any other, radiant yet reserved, warm yet untouchable. To gaze upon him was to feel both love and awe, as though one were staring into the very idea of perfection itself. Anansi's heart, ever restless, tangled itself in that brilliance. It was not envy he felt, but a peculiar ache, the ache of wanting to understand what it means to shine without shadow, to know without trick, to exist without hunger. The elders would later say that this was where it all began, with a glance, a thought, a spark of yearning that neither god nor mortal could contain. For even among the immortals, desire has a rhythm of its own, slow and dangerous, like a drumbeat heard from the edge of a dream.
The world itself seemed to lean closer, listening. The trees swayed in whispers, the ocean's sigh turned softer, as though the very elements awaited the unfolding of something inevitable. Anansi, small beneath the endless sky, began to weave his first silent web toward the heavens. Each thread glimmered in the sun, fragile yet determined, a secret path from earth to the divine. It was said that Niame noticed him long before Anansi dared to believe it. From his celestial throne, the god watched the tiny creature climb through shafts of light and cloud, each movement graceful, deliberate, almost reverent. There was something strangely alluring in Anansi's audacity, something pure in his cleverness. For Niame, who had seen worlds born and broken, this small being's determination was a song he had never heard before, raw, imperfect, but full of life. And so the first thread of their story tightened. The other gods whispered among themselves, amused and wary. "Does the little one truly believe he can reach the sky?" they asked, laughing. "Does he think his web can hold the weight of divinity?" But Anansi was not deterred. He spun and spun, his silken thoughts trailing upward like a prayer made visible. Each line trembled with desire and cunning, carrying the pulse of a heart that dared to bridge heaven and earth. Beneath him, the world watched. The mortals felt it, that strange stirring in the wind, that shimmer in the sun that made their skin hum with wonder. The story of Anansi's climb became a melody whispered by rivers, retold by firelight, sung by mothers to their children. For even then, before the tale had reached its end, it had already begun to live in every soul that longed for something beyond reach. But desire, no matter how divine its spark, always brings the risk of falling. The higher Anansi climbed, the thinner the air became. The closer he drew to light, so bright it could burn memory itself. Still, he continued, not out of arrogance, but out of an aching need to touch what he could not name.
He imagined what Nyame's breath might feel like, cool and ancient, brushing against his silken limbs. He imagined what secrets might dwell in the folds of the god's eternal calm. Perhaps, he thought, if he could only speak to him, he would understand why the heavens remained so silent, while the earth sang so loud. For in truth, Anansi was not merely a trickster. He was the voice of every creature that had ever looked upward and wondered why the stars refused to come closer. His hunger was the hunger of the world, not for power, but for intimacy with the divine. Nyame, in his infinite stillness, felt it too, that fragile pull from below, that trembling connection born not from prayer, but from desire. It reached him. And though he was a god, his essence vast and untouchable, something within him stirred. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps, too, it was a longing of his own, a yearning to be seen not as an idea, but as a being capable of feeling. Between them, the air shimmered, not with thunder, but with something far more dangerous, recognition. In that silent exchange between sky and spider, the world shifted ever so slightly. The clouds grew softer, the winds warmer, the light more tender. Something sacred and forbidden had awakened. It was in this quiet tension, this fragile thread of desire, that the myth of Anansi and Nyame was born, a story not only of tricks and trials, but of the yearning that binds gods and mortals alike, the kind of yearning that makes even the eternal tremble. The storytellers say that in those golden days before fate hardened into prophecy, every living being could feel the pulse of that connection. It was in the flutter of a bird's wings, in the sigh of the breeze at dusk, in the shimmer of webs that caught both dew and sunlight, a reminder that desire, when pure and reckless, has the power to shape the heavens themselves. Anansi stood upon his highest thread, the world spinning beneath him, the heavens within reach. He looked upward, and for the briefest moment the sky seemed to breathe back. He smiled then, that knowing, tender smile of one who both understands and defies destiny. For he had seen what no mortal had ever seen, that even gods in all their distance and grace were not immune to the pull of connection. And somewhere in the endless sky, Nyame's gaze lingered upon the small weaver who dared to reach him. The god did not speak, but the light softened, folding gently over Anansi's trembling web, neither granting nor denying what was sought. It was a promise and a warning both, a beginning written in silence, carried on golden air. Thus, the first threads of legend were spun, not of conquest, but of longing, and the world, cradled between light and shadow, held its breath for what would come next.
Beneath the wide belly of the heavens, where the horizon bends like a sigh between dream and waking, Anansi stirred. The dawn light brushed his form, delicate yet deliberate, revealing not the monstrous shape of a spider, as the fearful might imagine, but a being both supple and human in grace, his skin bronzed by the earth's warmth, his movements carrying the liquid rhythm of something born to dance between worlds. His eyes gleamed with intelligence too bright to be contained, and when he smiled, the very air seemed to tremble with amusement. Every gesture he made was threaded with intention. A flick of the wrist, a tilt of the head, a pause that hinted at secrets too playful to confess. He was beauty born of chaos, wit made flesh. His laughter could charm the thunder into stillness, and his silence could unsettle even the most ancient of gods. Anansi understood that the world itself was woven of stories, and that to master them was to master existence. But there was a hunger inside him, restless and sensual, that no trick could quiet. It was the hunger to be seen, not as small, not as clever, but as essential. His days often wandered upward, tracing the folds of the sky as one might trace the skin of a distant lover. He could feel Nyame's presence even when the god did not reveal himself, in the hush of the wind that brushed against his web, in the golden shimmer that lingered at twilight. It was not worship that filled his heart, but fascination, a deep, aching curiosity for the mind and the emotion behind that vast, serene light. Nyame, the eternal, was a being of impossible stillness. His essence stretched across the heavens like a song without end. Yet he moved with a grace that made every moment seem deliberate. His skin, if one could call it that, shimmered with the soft glow of sunrise.
His eyes were deep wells of blue and gold, reflecting the unending breath of creation. The air around him pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of the cosmos itself. To the mortals, Nyame was untouchable, the embodiment of order and perfection. His words could become laws, his silence could birth storms, and yet, in the stillness of his divinity, he felt something that unsettled him. It was as though some hidden string within his being had been plucked, vibrating softly with a note of intrigue. For all his radiance, Nyame's heart knew loneliness, the kind that only infinite beings feel when eternity stretches too long and too quiet. He had watched Anansi from afar, amused at first, then captivated. The small creature's defiance, his audacity to reach toward the heavens, had left an imprint that light itself could not erase. Nyame found himself wondering, what drives such fragile persistence? Was it ambition, or was it the pure joy of daring?
Their worlds, though divided, began to mirror one another in rhythm. When Anansi spun his webs, the stars above seemed to shimmer in patterns that echoed his movements. When Nyame shifted his gaze across the firmament, the air around Anansi grew electric, as though charged by divine curiosity. They were opposites, the weaver of tricks and the weaver of light, yet each seemed to sense a missing half within the other. One morning, as the sun climbed slow and amber, Anansi whispered to the air, his voice soft but steady. "Sky King," he said, the title both respectful and teasing, "tell me, do you ever tire of being so far away?" The wind stilled for a moment. The trees leaned closer, their leaves rustling like eavesdropping tongues, and from the silence above came a voice, smooth, resonant, timeless. "Far away from what, little one?" Nyame's tone was calm, but beneath it pulsed curiosity. "All that is exists within me. What could I be distant from?" Anansi smiled, his eyes catching the glint of morning light. He said, "Perhaps from the taste of your own creation. You have made beauty, but do you feel it? You hold the song, but do you ever dance to it?" There was no reply at first, only the hum of the world adjusting itself around the weight of such boldness. Nyame, unseen, considered this creature who dared to question the eternal. His divine composure flickered, not with anger but with intrigue. "Dance," he murmured, the word foreign on his tongue. "You speak of motion, of passion. You mistake stillness for absence, Anansi." Anansi answered, his voice lilting with mischief, "Perhaps, or perhaps I see something even you have forgotten, that the sky was never meant to watch forever, but to join the story it shelters." Nyame's laughter rolled like distant thunder, deep, beautiful, slightly dangerous. "You are bold," he said. "Boldness is the privilege of mortals. Why do you wear it?" Anansi tilted his head, his many thoughts flickering behind his smile. "Because even a spider must weave with something. I choose desire."
At that word, something trembled between them, subtle yet undeniable. The wind changed its rhythm, the light grew thicker, golden and slow. It was not lust that bridged them, but the raw recognition of one another's hunger, the god's need to feel, the trickster's need to be felt. As the day bled into dusk, Nyame allowed his form to shimmer into view. The sky rippled, and from its depths emerged the faint silhouette of a figure both radiant and ungraspable, like sunlight reflected on water. Anansi's breath caught. He had imagined Nyame's glory countless times, but the reality of it overwhelmed him. It was not merely beauty, it was truth made visible. "Do you see now?" Nyame said, his voice soft but commanding. "Why the heavens cannot bow to desire?" Anansi looked up, his body trembling not from fear, but from awe. "Perhaps," he whispered, "but I see too that desire bows to nothing." Nyame descended no further, yet the air around Anansi thickened, wrapping him in warmth. There was a pulse, faint but steady, between them. The god regarded the weaver like one might study a flame, fascinated, knowing it could burn, yet unable to turn away. "You tempt what should remain untouched," Nyame said, almost gently. "And you guard what begs to be known," Anansi replied. Their exchange lingered in the air like the taste of ripe fruit, sweet, perilous, unforgettable. The distance between them was still vast, yet both could feel its edges fraying, thread by thread. When night finally fell, Nyame withdrew to his throne of stars, his thoughts heavy with unfamiliar feeling. He found no rest in the calm expanse of heaven. The silence that once comforted him now echoed with the echo of Anansi's laughter. He wondered if this was what mortals felt when they prayed, a reaching beyond themselves, a trembling hope that someone above might answer, not with command, but with touch. Anansi, below, lay upon his web, gazing upward. He could still sense Nyame's presence, the faint shimmer of divine breath that lingered in the air. His heart, for once, was quiet, not out of satisfaction, but reverence. He had seen something vast, something impossibly beautiful, and it had seen him in return. The stars seemed closer that night, as though leaning down to listen. Between heaven and earth stretched a thread unseen, not spun of silk, but of something finer, a connection that pulsed softly with tension, admiration, and something like longing. Neither god nor trickster spoke again that night, but both knew that something irreversible had begun. Anansi, the restless weaver of tales, had caught the attention of the sky itself, and Nyame, the eternal, had discovered the perilous beauty of being seen.
The nights that followed became longer, heavier with thought and tremor. Anansi could not rest. His mind spun webs of longing as intricate as those he wove from silk. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shimmer of Nyame's light, not distant now, but hovering just beyond reach, as if waiting. The god's voice lingered in his head like the echo of thunder after rain, deep and unending. He told himself it was curiosity, that he sought only knowledge, a story worth telling, a secret from the heavens to make him immortal among mortals. But beneath that clever excuse pulsed something older and more dangerous. He wanted to touch the light, to be close enough to feel the pulse of divinity against his own trembling body. He wanted to weave his threads through the gods' calm eternity until they became one fabric. Desire, once whispered, now spoke boldly within him. One dawn, when the world was still painted in pale gold, Anansi climbed higher than before. Each thread he cast gleamed like a promise, delicate yet defiant. Below him, the earth blurred into soft shadow. Above, the heavens glowed like a vast breathing flame. His heart beat fast, its rhythm a prayer that had forgotten the words. "Why do you climb again, little weaver?" came Niame's voice, rich and steady, though tinged with something unspoken. Anansi paused, his body poised in midair. "Because stillness does not suit me, and because you left me wondering what it means to be more than a shadow beneath your light." Niame's laughter was low this time, almost human. "You think you can understand the sky? I think I can feel it, and feeling is the beginning of understanding." The wind trembled at the boldness of his tone. Niame could have ended him then, burned his silk, cast him into silence, yet he did not. Instead, he watched. There was something mesmerizing about the mortal's defiance that called to the lonely part of divinity that longed to be defied. "Tell me, Anansi," Niame said, "what would you give for the knowledge you seek?" The question hung heavy, like honey on the tongue. "Anything," Anansi replied without hesitation, "even the stories I have not yet told." "Careful," Niame said softly. "The stories are your soul." "Then perhaps," Anansi murmured, "it is my soul that must learn the sky's language." The god's light flickered, as though disturbed by wind. For the first time, Niame descended, not fully, but enough for the horizon to blush beneath his brilliance. The air thickened, trembling between heat and silence.
"If you truly wish to know the sky," Nyame said, "you must prove yourself worthy of its secrets. There are 4 jars that I keep, each holding a piece of the wisdom you seek. Patience, truth, desire, and loss. Bring them to me without deceit, and I shall reveal what only gods know." Anansi bowed, though his smile betrayed amusement. A god asks for honesty from a trickster. That in itself is a trick. "Perhaps," Nyame replied, "but even a web of lies can catch a moment of truth." And thus began the task. Anansi descended once more, the weight of the challenge pulsing within him like fire in his veins. His steps were light, his thoughts restless. Each jar was hidden somewhere across the world, guarded not by monsters or storms, but by the essence of what they contained. The first, patience, rested at the bottom of a still river. It shimmered faintly beneath the surface, so close and yet untouchable. He reached for it again and again, but every time his hand neared the water, ripples carried it away. The river seemed to whisper, "Wait, and you shall have it." But waiting was not in Anansi's nature. He tried tricks, songs, even pleas, and failed. Only when exhaustion overtook him did he finally surrender, lying still beside the riverbank. In that stillness, the water calmed, and the jar floated to him as if drawn by breath. When his fingers closed around it, he felt something warm, the slow pulse of understanding that patience is not the absence of action, but the art of letting things unfold. The second, truth, was hidden in the hollow of a mountain where echoes disguised themselves as answers. Anansi entered with confidence, calling out questions, receiving 1,000 mirrored replies. He smiled, at first amused by his own cleverness, but soon frustration began to gnaw at him. Which voice was real? Which reflection belonged to him? "Show me truth," he demanded. And the mountain replied, "You will find it when you stop asking for it." He fell silent then, breathing deeply, listening not to the echoes, but to the space between them. In that quiet, he heard something new, the sound of his own heartbeat, small yet steady. It spoke without words, and he understood. He left the mountain carrying the jar, his expression no longer mischievous, but thoughtful. The third, desire, was not hidden at all. It found him. A soft voice rose from the wind, calling his name with a sweetness that made his knees weaken. He turned and saw her, a figure woven of light and shadow, her shape shifting with every glance. Her eyes burned with the same gold he had seen in Nyame's gaze. She whispered, "Come closer. Take what you crave." Anansi hesitated. Every fiber of his being urged him forward, yet deep within he felt the echo of Nyame's earlier words. "Careful, little weaver."
He stepped closer nonetheless, drawn as much by fear as by longing. The air around him hummed with warmth, his breath quickened. She smiled, the embodiment of all he had ever wanted: beauty, recognition, closeness to the divine. When he reached out, she dissolved into mist, leaving behind only a jar, warm to the touch. Inside it pulsed a glow that seemed to mirror his own heartbeat. He laughed then, low, breathless, humbled. "Even desire," he whispered, "desires to be understood." The last jar, Loss, waited in the sky itself. To reach it, Anansi had to climb his web once more, higher than he had ever dared. Each thread quivered beneath his weight. The world below shrank into a trembling circle of green and gold. The air grew thin, his body trembled, yet he continued, his eyes fixed on the faint glimmer above. At the top, there was no jar, only emptiness. He looked around, confusion twisting into dread. "Nyame, I have done all you asked. Where is the final gift?" From the vastness came a whisper, not of anger, but of sorrow. "Loss is what you carry when you reach too far." The wind shuddered, and his web began to unravel. The jars he had gathered
fell from his hands, descending like falling stars. For an instant, panic seized him, and then understanding. The final lesson was not to possess, but to surrender. He closed his eyes, feeling the silk loosen beneath him, and allowed himself to fall. The descent was not pain, but revelation. Wind kissing his skin, air burning with light. In that free fall, he felt Niame's presence, immense and tender, wrapping around him like the warmth of dusk. When he opened his eyes again, he was suspended mid-air, cradled by a single golden thread, one spun not by his hand, but by Niame's. "You have fallen, and yet you have not broken," the god said, his voice low and resonant. Anansi's chest rose and fell with the quiet laugh. Perhaps falling is the only way to touch what cannot be reached. Niame regarded him with something that was not quite pride, not quite affection, something older, deeper, and more dangerous. "You have learned much, but knowledge born of desire always costs more than it gives." "I know, and I would still climb again." Niame's gaze softened, his light dimming to a glow that felt almost human. "You are reckless," he said. "And you," Anansi replied, his eyes glinting, "are beautiful." For a heartbeat, silence ruled the heavens. Then the light trembled, rippling through the clouds like breath. Between god and trickster, reverence and longing became one, not spoken, not fulfilled, but felt. The web of the world quivered with it. Desire had found its rhythm, dangerous and irresistible, a heartbeat shared between sky and earth.
The sky burned with the color of honey and flame. Evening had come softly, its warmth trembling over the horizon like a slow exhale. The wind was quiet, not gone, but listening, and all creation seemed to hold its breath. On that golden edge between day and night, Anansi stood suspended upon his last thread, the remnants of his fallen web glimmering below like pieces of a forgotten dream. Above him, the firmament pulsed, vast and alive. Niame was there. The god's presence filled the sky without sound or form, a shimmer of light that bent the world round it. The stars, not yet born into night, hid their glow out of reverence. His radiance was softer now, not the fierce brilliance of command, but the deep enveloping warmth of presence. He looked upon Anansi, not as one might look upon a creature, but as one looks into a mirror and finds something unexpected gazing back. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them thickened, humming with the tension of two beings who had reached the edge of understanding and the edge of themselves. Anansi's voice, when it came, was low and trembling. "I have fallen, I have climbed, and still I do not know where I stand with you." Niame's light flickered faintly, like breath over flame.
You stand where no mortal should, between reverence and desire." The words wound through Anansi's chest, pulling at something tender and unguarded. He looked up, eyes shining with more than curiosity now. "And what is it that keeps you from casting me down, Sky King? Is it mercy or fascination?" For the first time in eternity, Niame hesitated. The air quivered, alive with heat. "You presume too much," he said, though his voice carried no anger. Anansi smiled faintly. "I presume only what I feel." The wind stirred, circling them both. Anansi's silk threads trembled, their sound like a whisper of longing. Light poured over him, soft and golden, outlining the curve of his shoulders, the quick rise and fall of his chest. He was small before Niame's vastness, yet the god felt the imbalanced tilt, not in power, but in gravity. "You have taken much from me," he murmured. "Patience, truth, desire, loss. Do you not fear what remains to be taken?"
"I fear nothing that comes from you," Anansi replied. His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the rawness of the truth within it. "For even loss in your light feels like being seen." The god's glow deepened, golden fire laced with blue. "And being seen is what you crave? It is what all stories crave, to be known, to be remembered. Even gods fade without stories to hold them." Nyame fell silent again, and the heavens seemed to pulse in slow rhythm with his thoughts. Then, almost imperceptibly, the sky began to lower, folding itself closer to the small weaver who dared speak such truths. Anansi felt the change, a shift in air, a tremor in the invisible boundary between divine and mortal. The warmth around him thickened, sweet and heavy like ripened fruit. His breath caught, every sense sharpened, the faint taste of rain in the air. The way the world's hum seemed to slow, the dizzying nearness of something immense and impossible. Then Nyame appeared, not as light alone, but in a form that shimmered between man and star, both solid and ethereal. His features were fluid, sculpted from radiance and memory. His eyes were endless, the kind that did not merely see, but understood. When he spoke again, his voice trembled faintly, like the first crack in perfection. "You have climbed higher than you were ever meant to. You have reached into the silence of the gods and returned with song. Why, Anansi? Why risk yourself for what was never yours to hold?" Anansi met his gaze. "Because beauty that is never touched is only half alive." The words hung between them, reckless, reverent, true. Nyame's hand, if it could be called that, extended, woven from light. Anansi hesitated, his breath shaking. To touch a god was to invite dissolution, yet he reached forward anyway. Their fingertips met, mortal thread and celestial flame, and the world gasped. A ripple surged through creation, the sky bent,
ocean stilled, and even the insects fell silent in the grasses below. The touch was not of skin, but of essence, an exchange that defied form. Warmth and coolness collided, hunger and restraint entwined.
Nyame's brilliance flared, yet he did not withdraw. He could feel it, the pulse of something alive and tender inside the trickster. Not worship, not defiance, something purer, the longing to belong. Anansi trembled, his body caught between pain and bliss. So this is the truth that hid in your silence, he whispered. Not distance, not wrath, but yearning. The god's light dimmed slightly, folding into something intimate. You speak as though you know the heart of the sky. I only know the way it beats when it looks at me. Their words fell away then, replaced with stillness. The connection deepened, weaving through them both. Anansi felt the weight of the stars pressing close, the hum of divine thought brushing his soul. Nyame felt the fragile insistence of mortal warmth, the exquisite impermanence that no eternity could mimic. Their union was not physical, yet it was deeply sensual, a meeting of energies so complete that the air seemed to shimmer with soundless music. Anansi's silk threads lit up, glowing like veins of gold. Each thread vibrated, carrying the rhythm of both their hearts. The world below shimmered in reflection, rivers turning silver, leaves trembling in invisible wind. And then came the surrender, not of one to the other, but of both to the moment. Pride unraveled, divinity loosened its perfect order. The eternal bent to meet the fleeting, and the fleeting dared to touch the eternal. Anansi, overwhelmed, closed his eyes. "If I die in this light," he murmured, "let my stories carry me to you." Nyame's voice came softly. "You will not die, you will become." The warmth enveloped him fully then, an embrace that was not arms, but infinity itself. He felt himself dissolve and expand, as though every thread he had ever spun was now part of the sky. For an instant he was both spider and star, trickster and truth. He felt Nyame within him, not as a god above, but as a heartbeat beside his own. When the light finally faded, the two stood apart once more, the air between them charged, trembling. Nyame's radiance had softened to something human, fragile even. Anansi's body glowed faintly, his eyes wide with awe. "You have touched what no mortal should," Nyame said quietly. "And yet," Anansi replied, voice gentle, "you let me." The god's lips curved into something rare, a smile born not of divinity, but of understanding. Perhaps I too wished to be touched. Below them the earth stirred again, resuming its rhythm, unaware that its balance had shifted forever. The web between sky and soil now shimmered faintly, eternal threads of light woven into the firmament itself, the mark of their meeting. Anansi bowed, not as servant to master,
but as equal to equal. Then let the world remember this, he said softly, that even the heavens can feel desire. Nyame's gaze lingered upon him, and for the briefest heartbeat, eternity seemed to breathe.
Dawn came slow, like a secret being remembered. The first light unfurled across the heavens, washing away the remnants of night's gold and blue. The air was cool and trembling, as if it still held the echo of what had passed. And there, upon the invisible threshold between earth and sky, Anansi hung in silence, neither wholly mortal nor divine, caught in the tender ache that follows revelation. His web, once broken, now shimmered anew. Each strand glowed faintly, woven not from silk alone, but from something brighter. Threads of starlight gifted, or perhaps stolen from Nyame's own body. They hummed with stories not yet told, alive with a quiet rhythm that pulsed in time with his breath. Anansi gazed upon them, the corners of his mouth curving into a bittersweet smile. His limbs felt heavy with wonder and fatigue, his spirit stretched thin between joy and mourning. He had touched the sky, and in doing so had lost a part of himself that would never return to simplicity again. From above, Nyame's voice descended, softer now, stripped of thunder. Anansi. The trickster lifted his gaze. The god's radiance had dimmed, as though even the sun hesitated before shining upon him. Nyame's form wavered between cloud and flame, his outline less sure, his presence more tender. You have taken a piece of my light, and with it the burden of memory. What you have touched cannot be untouched. Anansi bowed his head slightly, the faintest laugh slipping through his lips. Then I am bound by it, as the web is bound to the wind. Nyame studied him with a gaze that was both distant and near, divine and heartbreakingly human. You sought knowledge and found longing. You sought mastery and found surrender. Tell me, trickster, was it worth the climb? Anansi's eyes glimmered. How can one measure the worth of touching the infinite? I have seen the heart of the sky, and it beats with the same hunger as mine. Perhaps that is all I ever needed to know. The wind stirred gently, carrying his words upward like smoke. Nyame's expression shifted, a flicker of pain, or perhaps tenderness, too subtle to name. You speak as though we are equals. Not equals, Anansi said softly. Reflections. For a heartbeat, silence. Then a low sound. Neither thunder nor sigh, but something in between. Nyame descended slightly, his vastness pressing close to the horizon, his warmth brushing over Anansi's web. The contact sent shivers down the air. Reflections, Nyame repeated, as though tasting the taste of the word. Then perhaps you are not entirely wrong, for I looked into you and saw what I had long forgotten, the ache of creation, the pulse of imperfection that gives meaning to eternity. Anansi bowed lower, his voice barely a whisper,
and I looked into you and saw beauty so vast it frightened me. It made me want to become more and less, all at once. A long pause stretched between them. Then Niami's light grew faint, folding back into the deeper blue of morning. He said, "The world will not remember this as it happened, but in stories, in fragments. Your name will carry mine, and mine will echo through yours. That is your gift and your curse." Anansi's chest tightened. "So I must forget?" "No," Niami answered. "You must remember and tell." The god's glow began to retreat, each flicker dimming like a dying flame. "But know this, every story you spin will carry a trace of what passed between us. Every whisper of desire, every spark of mischief, every truth dressed in trickery, they will all be born from this moment. You will spread my light even as you believe it your own." Anansi felt his breath catch. "Then we are bound forever." "Yes," Niami said, voice fading to a murmur, "but bound by distance." The wind fell still, the warmth withdrew, and with that the Sky King was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of rain and light. Anansi remained there, motionless, watching as the horizon stretched open like a new story waiting to be told. The ache in his chest was almost unbearable, a sweet, radiant wound. He touched the web before him, feeling its hum vibrate through his fingertips. Each strand whispered fragments of what he had seen, light upon light, silence becoming song, the echo of divine breath against mortal skin. And so, with trembling hands, he began to weave.
The first thread sang of the stars, how they were not merely fire, but memory. The second spoke of gods, how even they could tremble when touched by longing. The third told of a spider who climbed higher than any mortal dared and found love disguised as wisdom. He worked through the dawn, each motion slow, reverent, alive. His body swayed to a rhythm only he could hear, the lingering echo of Nyame's heartbeat in his own. As he wove, the world below began to stir. Birds took flight, their wings tracing new constellations across the air. Rivers shimmered faintly, reflecting webs of light that hadn't been there before. The people of the land would later say that in those days the sky itself seemed closer, that dreams came easier, that stories whispered themselves into being. And in the soft hush of early light, Anansi whispered to no one, "This is what remains." His eyes glistened with tears he did not shed. Not victory, not defeat, only the beauty of having touched what was never meant to be touched. The breeze answered him gently, curling through his threads like a familiar hand. It carried his words into the distance, where they would scatter and seed countless tales. Some would call them fables, others would call them prayers. But hidden within them, between the laughter, the deceit, the wisdom, was the faint shimmer of something sacred, the memory of a God's compassion,
the residue of divine longing, and the soft ache of a trickster who once loved the sky too deeply. By the time the sun stood high, Anansi had finished his weaving. A vast web stretched across the horizon, so fine it could only be seen when the light touched it just right. Those who glimpsed it would swear it was the face of dawn itself smiling. Anansi, exhausted, reclined within it, his eyes half closed. You gave me the stories, Nyame, but you kept the silence. Perhaps that was mercy. The breeze waved, creaking softly. Far above, unseen yet ever present, Nyame watched, his expression unreadable, part sorrow, part pride, and he whispered to the wind, "And perhaps you gave me the memory I did not know I missed." The morning continued its climb, erasing the shimmer of what had been. But if one looked closely, in the trembling air between sunlight and shadow, one could almost see it, a golden thread connecting earth and sky, trembling with the breath of something eternal. And within it, the faint laughter of Anansi, soft, mischievous, and tender, echoing across time, carrying the story forward.
They say that when twilight folds itself across the world, the web of Anansi still trembles high above the trees, faint, luminous, alive with the breath of memory. To the unknowing eye, it is only the shimmer of dusk caught in the wind. But those who listen, truly listen, can hear its quiet hum, the low vibration of something that once bound heaven and earth together. That hum is not the sound of silk, but of longing. It is the echo of a story that began with desire and ended with awakening. Anansi's tale does not fade because it is not a story of conquest, but of becoming. Beneath his mischief and laughter lies the same hunger that moves rivers and stirs stars, the longing to touch what cannot be touched, to feel the pulse of the divine and claim it as one's own. The spider reached for the light not because he wished to steal from the heavens, but because he could not bear to live beneath them without knowing what they felt like against his skin. His climb was a confession, a declaration of need, and though his body was small, his yearning was vast enough to shake the silence of Nyame himself. For the gods, wrapped in their perfection, often forget what it means to ache. They exist in stillness, in unchanging glory. But Anansi reminded Nyame, as desire always does, that creation is born not from peace, but from disturbance, from a trembling of the soul that says, "I want." When their worlds touched, something irreversible happened. It was not a war, nor a victory, but an exchange, quiet, shattering, intimate. Nyame's light entered Anansi, and Anansi's daring entered Nyame. For a breathless instant, god and trickster became reflections of one another, one learning the sweetness of vulnerability, the other the cost of transcendence. That moment, brief as it was, changed them both. From that union, the first true story was born. It was not carved into stone or written on papyrus. It lived in the trembling space between them, in the hush after surrender, in the quiet ache of what must now be remembered. That story was the seed of all stories to come, because it carried within it the essence of creation itself, longing turned into form.
Anansi returned to the world below, altered in ways no mortal could name. His laughter still danced, but beneath it ran a new sound, the hum of something sacred, the soft ache of having once touched eternity. Every web he wove from that day forward shimmered faintly, even in the absence of light. The villagers would see it glisten at dawn and say, "Anansi's silk catches the sun." But it was not the sun. It was Niame's memory caught within each thread. He had lost much, the simplicity of hunger, the ignorance of limits, but in that loss he found depth. His stories grew heavier, more human, more divine. When he spoke, the air itself seemed to listen. When he laughed, the sound carried sorrow. And when he rested, eyes half closed against the shimmer of his web, the horizon always seemed to tremble, as though some unseen god leaned closer just to hear him breathe. Niame too was changed. The Sky King, who once saw mortals as distant curiosities, began to watch the earth with something almost like tenderness. The perfection of the heavens felt colder now, emptier. He had glimpsed the pulse of mortal desire and recognized in it the beauty his own realm lacked, the beauty of impermanence, of striving, of pain that becomes creation. He understood then that the divine without longing is only silence, and so, in his vastness, Niame allowed the winds to carry whispers of himself down to the mortal world, faint traces of warmth, dreams that shimmered like silk. He gave them freely, though none would know his hand in it. Perhaps it was a gift to Anansi, or perhaps it was his way of remembering. The world, sensing this new bond between sky and earth, began to shift. Stories became sacred things, vessels through which mortals could feel the breath of gods. The space between word and silence became a bridge, fragile but unbreakable. Every story carried a heartbeat. Every truth wore the disguise of a lie. And at the center of it all was Anansi, spinning webs that held the world together in their invisible threads. His followers told his stories for centuries, how he tricked, how he laughed, how he defied gods and men. But hidden beneath each jest was a trace of that divine encounter, a longing that refused to fade. Even his cleverest lies carried the rhythm of that night when the trickster and the Sky King became one heartbeat for a single breath. And that is why his myth endures, because it is not about triumph, but about yearning. Every listener feels it, whether they know it or not, that subtle stirring in the chest when the tale is told, the reminder that something beyond reach still calls to us. We may not climb webs into the heavens, but we too spin our threads of love, of art, of dreams, each one an attempt to bridge the impossible distance between what we are and what we wish to touch. The cost of such desire is always the same: transformation. Those who dare to reach the divine never return untouched. They lose their innocence,
but gain awareness. They shed simplicity, but awaken to depth. And in that exchange, that burning, that surrender, something eternal is born. So when the wind moves softly at dusk, and the sky glows with the faint gold of forgotten light, listen closely. The trembling you hear is not the world ending, but remembering. It is the sound of Anansi's web vibrating with all the stories yet to be told. It is the murmur of Niame's voice whispering through time, saying, I see you. I have not forgotten. For gods do not truly fade, and neither do desires once touched by divinity. They live on in the spaces between breaths, in the moments before sleep when memory feels like touch. They live in the laughter that hides a tear, in the silence after creation, in the warmth that lingers when a story ends but the feeling remains. And perhaps that is the lesson, that the bridge between mortal and divine is not built from power but from yearning, not from obedience but from audacity. Every time a heart reaches toward something larger than itself, toward beauty, knowledge, love, Anansi's thread trembles again, and Niame looks down, smiling faintly at the echo of what once was. The myth does not end where words do. It continues in the air, in the pulse beneath your skin. It invites you to listen, to feel the space between the notes, to recognize yourself in the trembling light. For the same hunger that drove Anansi burns within all who dream. It is the longing that turns silence into song, the spark that teaches the stars how to shine. And in the hush after the telling, when the final word fades into the dark, there remains only a feeling, warm, weightless, eternal, as if the web itself has stretched across your chest, and you too have touched the edge of the divine. Listen closely. It hums still.